Hello everybody, it's Tanya and welcome back to today's video. It's been a while, I know, but today I'm here to share with you some of the best books which I have read in 2024. Granted, they are not a lot. Past year it wasn't a big reading year for me. Reading wasn't a priority at all. I had a lot of other things going on, mostly positive, mostly happy. I was able to travel around Japan more. I was able to see more of this beautiful country. Also, my best friend, whom I last met 10 years ago, like in person. Last time we met 10 years ago in person. So she finally was able to come to me and visit me here in Japan, and she spent a month here. So we also sometimes spent in Tokyo, and then we also went traveling around. We went to Kyoto, we went to Nara, we went to Hokkaido as well. So it was an intense year in a good sense of the word. It was also very, I would say, I have matured quite a bit this past year. I would call it a year of growth, to be honest, but in a sense of like emotional intelligence kind of growth, because I met so many very interesting people which I was able to share certain experiences with, and it was great. I was learning certain lessons from them, and it's been an intensive year. It has been a very interesting year for me, which I am super grateful for. Reading wasn't a priority, but I did read. And certain books which I will be sharing with you today, I absolutely loved. And that's why I wanted to film this video, even though I'm not particularly proud of myself this past year in terms of my reading, because I think, I didn't count, but I think I read maybe 12 books altogether. But yeah, it's very few books I read this year. But for the most part, they were really good books. And some of them I absolutely loved. These are some of the books which I want to share with you. Let's start. The first book is this one by Dmitry Sergeyevich Likhachev. This is my Russian copy. Dmitry Sergeyevich Likhachev о жизни. In English, I think it would be something on life, or it could be translated as memoirs, it could be translated as his autobiography. I know that it has been translated. I think I saw on the internet an old version of it, so I'm pretty sure it is translated, but it might be an old translation and it might be like a very old edition. So maybe if you will be looking for this one, maybe you will be able to find it in some kind of like second-hand bookshops or maybe second-hand online bookshop. So it's not a new edition. The translation would be old. I haven't seen any newer translations or editions of this book in English. But if you can find it, I don't know where, but if you can find it, if you come across this book, do yourself a favor. Don't even think about it. Do not even think about it. I'm telling you, like, trust me on this one. You have to get it. If you can find it, you have to get it. I have recommended this book to everyone I know. I have recommended this book to my parents. My mom has read it. She absolutely loved it. I've recommended it to my father. My father is very slow on picking up books because he's very busy. He works a lot. So he doesn't really have much time for reading. I'm still working on my father, but I know that he will really like it. I've recommended it to my friends and just my acquaintances. This book is so good. This is so good. This year, like, it's one of my discoveries this year. In this year, I discovered for myself autobiographical writing, biographies, and historical writing. Spheres, which I never looked into before. It's like my new newly developed interest. Dmitry Sergeyevich Likhachov, he is a famous Russian academic. His sphere of interest is medieval Russian literature, and he is mostly famous for his research in medieval Russian literature. He translated certain texts from medieval Russian. He has published research, so he is mostly famous for that, but not only for that. I heard someone call him the conscience of Russia, because he has, apart from his academic writing, he has two books that I personally know of that are on different topics. So the first book, which I haven't read, but my parents do have it, it's Letters to the Youth. And as far as I know, those letters, those like short kind of essays, and they focus on like moral side of life. They give certain advice to young people. I haven't read them, so I don't know what kind of advice, but I assume it's something about, some kind of moral advice, life advice, this type of book. I do want to read it. And the second book is this one. This is his, like I have already mentioned, his biography, his memoir, and he just narrates his life. And he was born in the beginning of the 20th century in St. Petersburg. And as you know, the beginning of 20th century in Russia was absolutely insane. I have no idea how people survived, how they were able to survive. He comes from quite a well-off family. His father used to be a publisher. He used to work in the publishing. And his life, it is very representative of everything that was happening in Russia with the fall of monarchy, with the appearance of the Communist Party, and with the appearance of the USSR. So his life is very, very representative of that period of life. And he has been through everything I think you can imagine. He doesn't write a lot about the revolution of 1917 because it kind of brushed by him. He didn't participate in any of uprisings. He wasn't affected much by the revolutionary events themselves. But by everything that happened afterwards, he was affected because he was a university student. And, universities are such places where multiple ideas, they kind of collide together. And of course, people are intelligent. They want to discuss them. They often have their own opinions about everything that is going on. And in an atmosphere like that, with the Communist Party being in charge and being suspecting everybody of everything, people went to prison like for nothing. They could go to the camps for like absolutely just for owning a book. Like in his case, he was arrested and sent to Solovki just for owning a book. Like unthinkable nowadays, but that's what happened to him. And in this book he goes about everything. He goes about the beginning of the 20th century, his childhood. His family was acquainted with some Russian writers, some Russian artists. He talks about St. Petersburg of that time, how certain quarters were like artist quarters, other quarters were writers' quarters. So like you could go to like different districts of the city and participate in like in such different aspects of cultural life of the city. And it was fascinating for me, to be honest. He describes his life in the university and the students and his teachers, how they formed certain circles, like they discussed ideas, philosophical ideas, they discussed scientific ideas, they talked about all of it. And it's first of all, I felt that probably people like that do not exist anymore, and it kind of made me a little bit sad because I really liked what he wrote about his like philosophical circle that he attended when he was in university. And then the most interesting part for me was the part when he was in Solovki. That's a camp. Like a prison camp. The best part about his autobiography, and he writes about it himself, that the most important things in any book and biography are the people. And the most important things in your life are the people that you meet. because you learn from them, and that's what the whole life is about. The whole life is about people and interacting with people and what they do and what they believe and how they act and what they do. Like, the whole life is people. And that's why in this autobiography, he doesn't really even write about himself so much. I mean, of course, he writes about his experiences, what happened to him, but whenever he can, he writes about fascinating people he met. And in the part about Solovki, it's mostly about people that he was with when he was there. Multiple different people, students, not students, elderly people, middle-aged people, academics, not academics, artists. Like, it was such a concentration of such different people. Many of them were highly educated. Many of them were very religious. He also talks about religion here, that he himself wasn't really religious. He had an interesting idea that as soon as after the revolution, as soon as the revolution happened, the murders of priests started, which is like notorious. The representatives of church were murdered and sent to camps and imprisoned, so it's like notorious for that. And he and his friends, they were not really religious, but when that started happening, they realized that obviously the new government is anti-church, is anti-religious, and just to express some kind of protest against that, they started going to church. Just to express support of the church, they started going there, even though like they didn't really believe in God. A lot of like life questions he raises here, and he kind of shows how he acted in certain aspects of his life. And it's surprising how, with such a difficult life, with so many difficult choices that he had to make, he personally and his friends were able to stay honest people. They were able to stay kind, they were able to stay loving, they were able to stay educated and intelligent and stand up for what they believed in. And at the same time, like, they were not proud of that. I feel like when you describe certain terrible events that happened, not necessarily in biographies and autobiographies, in any type of book, when they describe horrific events, some of the descriptions, they really go very much into like showing off type of suffering. Like, it's like they are almost proud that they're going through the suffering. They're almost to the verge of like being really stuck up with the suffering that the characters are going through, or the person himself or herself are going through. This book, even though obviously what he went through was just horrific, he talks about it with such simplicity, and there is no pride about that. There is no exaggerations. It's just as it was. He doesn't, stuff the suffering into the reader. He isn't trying to impress the reader with anything. He is not emphasizing the suffering. The suffering and the hardship is not the central point of this book. It's not that. The center and the central topic of this book are the people, the choices they made, how they behaved, what became of them, and really liked it. So yeah, this book is absolutely phenomenal. I absolutely loved it. I think I will be doing a separate video just on this book, or maybe just on his life. I need to prepare for that, because I don't have enough vocabulary to just, yes, I am limited by my English vocabulary to speak about this book in a way that I want to speak about this book. I feel very limited, but I do want to prepare like a really big, well done video about it, because I want so many people to read it. I think it really forces you to reflect on your own behavior and on just on life in general, and choices that you would make and other people are making, and how they affect people's lives, other people's lives. Like it's a phenomenal book. I absolutely adore it. This book is a highlight of my year, and I absolutely love it. So if you can find this book, Likhachev, Dmitry Sergeyevich Likhachev, like his memoirs or a life, could be called anything like that in English, I highly recommend. Don't even think, just buy it and read it immediately. So this was the first book. The next book, which I would like to share with you, is also Russian. I've been reading not so many Russian books, but some of the Russian books that I read were my favorite. So this is Sergei Dovlatov and his collection of short stories. So he writes like very short collections of short stories. This one is called The Suitcase. I know that he is translated into English and even like recently, so you definitely can find his collections. So I highly recommend Sergei Dovlatov, The Suitcase. This is a very funny collection. I think the most representative thing about him is that he was really fond of Chekhov, and he would like to be like Chekhov. And it shows, because his short stories are absolutely hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. When I was reading them, I was reading them in coffee shops, I was reading them in restaurants while I was like waiting for my food, and I was constantly smiling and laughing. But it's the type of laughter which is always mixed with a little bit of sadness. It is never like just, these are not funny stories. These are stories about his life and things that happened to him. And they are very funny. But at the same time, they're a little bit always kind of sad. It's not even bittersweet. There is a bittersweet emotion to that. There is just kind of sadness about his life kind of emotion, but it's always inevitably funny. He had a great sense of humor. He was born sometime in the middle of the 20th century, and in 1979 he immigrated to America. And the rest of his life he lived in America, but he was always writing about Soviet Union, Russia, and later about Russian diaspora in New York. So he is inevitably a Russian writer. This particular collection, The Suitcase, which I actually reread it because I read it many years ago. I have of course already forgotten what was there by the time I started rereading it. I loved it back then, and when I read it back then, I recommended it to my dad. My dad, after that, read all of his collections, all of Sergei Dovlatov's collection, all of his works, and Dovlatov is one of my dad's favorite writers. This particular collection, why is it called Suitcase? He starts with a foreword that when he was leaving the USSR, when he was immigrating to America, everything he had was just one suitcase. And it made him very sad because he was immigrating when he was 36, and he writes that in the whole course of my 36 years life, a small suitcase is all of my possessions. And he felt very bad about it. And then each short story is a short story about the contents of that suitcase. So inside of that suitcase, he had a suit, he had certain pair of shoes, he had a belt, he had socks. So different things which he brought with himself to America, never actually used them there. And then later his younger son just found that suitcase, and he took it out of the closet and he opened it, and and he started and he wrote this collection telling a story about how he acquired each of those items and how they are important to him and how they're memorable to him. And each story is funny and sad, and it creates like mixed feelings in you, and it's just absolutely brilliant. I absolutely love this collection. Absolutely love this collection. You have to read it for yourself. It's like, humor is hard to explain, and emotions are difficult to explain. You just have to feel them, you just have to live them. So there is nothing much I can say about this collection of short stories except that just find it and read it and see for yourself. And it's very short, so it will not take much of your time, but I think anybody can appreciate it. It is about life in USSR. It is about people in the USSR in like the middle of the 20th century, so it's not already like tragic in the sense of like Dmitry Sergeyevich Likhachev, who was writing about the beginning of the 20th century. This time that Davlatov is living in is much more liberal. Well, as much as it can be liberal in the Soviet Union. And there is nothing much I can say about it. Just read it. Just read it. It's a collection of short stories, and each story is absolutely brilliant. So highly recommend Sergei Davlatov, The Suitcase. And then the next book which I want to share is you can definitely find it. This is also a Russian book. This is The Sevastopol Sketches by Leo Tolstoy. This is one of his earlier books. He wrote it when he didn't even write it as a book. He was a young officer in army. He participated in the Crimea War, which was happening in 1853 to 1857. And he also happened to be in Sevastopol. And Sevastopol was like a stronghold which was defended for a very long time, and the French army wasn't able to take it for a very, very long time. And there's only 3 short stories in this collection, and it's very interesting how the mood of these stories is changing. The first story is when he just arrived to Sevastopol, and this young man was overwhelmed by his patriotic feelings. He is very excited about being in Sevastopol. He is very proud to be there. He is proud for the Russian army that is defending Sevastopol. He describes the soldiers, he describes the hospital, he describes all the suffering, but he describes it with a sense of patriotism and how these people are, defending their country, and they're defending their emperor. So the first story is full of this excited young man's feelings. And then you go on to the second story, and the tone changes quite drastically, to be honest. You don't expect that, because the second story, it's already quite melancholic actually, and he talks about how war is a completely irrational business, how war should not be, it should not exist in the world of intelligent creatures that people are supposed to be. He shows the officers who are portrayed as not so much concerned with their patriotism about their country. They're more concerned about how society will perceive them. They're concerned with their ranks, with the praises that they will get from people. They're very concerned with, do they look brave? None of them are actually brave. They just want to look brave. They don't really want to participate in any of the military actions. They try to stay back as much as possible. But if they have to go on the front, like on the first front, where all the action is happening, they don't really do much there. They just walk around, ask questions, and they're very concerned about the looks rather than what they're actually doing. And then you see them in contrast with soldiers who are absolutely not concerned what they look like, and they, simple soldiers, simple people, those are the ones who actually sacrifice their lives, who actually sacrifice their health. It's a constant flow of soldiers with who had lost their legs, who had lost their arms, in contrast with officers who and generals who, are perfectly fine. They are drinking, they are, just talking about high matters, while other people are dying in their stead. So that's like the tone of the second chapter, of the second story. And then the last third story is already describes how the Sevastopol was taken by the French army, how Russian army had to withdraw. And after a few years, they had to submit, they had to give up the city. That short story is filled with tragedy because you see, it focuses on two brothers, one older, one younger. The younger brother is like his first ever war, and he came to this war just like Tolstoy when he wrote the first short story. He came there purely on his patriotic feeling. He came there purely on his romantic ideas. He didn't have to go there. He was just filled with certain romantic ideas that like you have to defend your country, you have to defend your emperor, and like that. And he comes there and he sees the real war, the real life, the real people, the real thing, which is not romantic at all, which is not beautiful at all. And he has to face all of it and like see what happens. And it is like the last story is filled with tragedy. Yeah, there is just a lot of pain and regret about the war and what it brings to people. So I also absolutely loved this book. Of course, like writing is impeccable, wonderful, absolutely loved it. He also received a lot of, when he first was publishing these short stories, he was publishing them in Современник, which at that time was a very popular magazine, like literary magazine, which was run by Nekrasov. Nekrasov is also like a Russian poet. And when the stories were coming out, the first one had a great feedback from the public and from readers. The second story was cut in multiple places because it couldn't be published, and in the full form it was published many years after. But still, public absolutely loved these stories. Yeah, these short stories, they were beloved ever since they were first published, and he published them as a very young man. And yeah, I also really enjoyed them, so highly recommended. Leo Tolstoy, The Sevastopol Sketches. The next two books I want to talk about, they are vain with my discovery of historical writing and of biographies. So I'm still reading them. I have not finished them yet. I'm slowly making my way through them. So the first one is the biography of Leon Trotsky. I've always thought that the 20th century in Russia is one of the most interesting periods in history of Russia. And so I just wanted to read more on that period. Obviously, I know like the main course of events, I know the main participants, kind of the main personalities that were present in that period of time, but I just want to learn more. I want to get into the topic a little bit deeper. So I started with biography of Leon Trotsky. I watched like a ton of videos on his biography, and he is an insanely interesting person. He is obviously like a horrible person, loved himself immensely, but at the same time, like the energy that he possessed, the intelligence that he possessed, the charisma, the strength, physical and like the strength of character that he possessed. Like, you cannot not respect him. He is a horrible person. He is a very terrifying person. But at the same time, like, it's impossible not to respect him. Can you respect a bad guy? That's like the question. Can you respect? Is he a bad guy? He obviously like horrible. But what he did, like he has done so many like scary things, and he killed so many people. So many people died because of him, and like, yeah, understanding all of that, and it is true. But at the same time, he did what he believed in. Like, obviously, the execution and the system that he created is like a logical development of his personality, of his unyielding personality, very strong-willed personality, very self-centered personality as well. So the system that was created, it wasn't really what he was aiming for, but it is a logical extension of who he is. And at the same time, everything that he has done, like changing the regime, this steadfast regime, that steadfast kind of society that was present in Russia by the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, with the traditions, with everything, with beliefs, and then turning it completely upside down, changing it, like unrooting it completely and setting in something absolutely new and foreign, like on a scale of a country, on a scale of a nation. That takes a personality of immense scope. It's unthinkable, like the strength that he possessed, the energy that he possessed. Like, I'm so in awe just of the pure energy and strength and intelligence and like unyieldingness. And it's like he is a very interesting person. And yes, he is in a very simple in a very simplified form, in a but at the same time, it doesn't mean that it's not true if it's simplified. It is all, like, of course he has done horrible things, but how interesting he is. So interesting. And yeah, I do not justify anything of he has done, but at the same time, I do not demonize him. I just want to see what kind of person was this that was able to perform such a feat of completely uprooting the country and setting in something new. So yeah, I'm just interested in his personality, and I feel like this biography by Robert Service is really very interesting and very, very informative. I'm reading like the English language biographies because these are the books that are the easiest for me to get being here in Japan. So eventually, when I go to Russia, I would like also to find like a Russian biography about him. But this one is really very, very informative and very interesting, and it reads very easily. Each chapter is about like 10 pages, so it's like you get through them quite easily. And yeah, fascinating personality, absolutely fascinating. So yeah, recommended. I'm still reading it. Then the next book, which I'm still reading. I'm still not done with this book. This is A People's Tragedy by Orlando. How do you read his last name? I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but it's this book, A People's Tragedy. It is also about the beginning of the 20th century in Russia, about the revolution of the 1917, and about the civil war in Russia, which followed the revolution. I am not long way through the book, I'm here. But I really like that this book has a lot of old photos Like, you see all this, like, can you see these lines? These are all these lines. These are photos. So a lot of photo material, which is fascinating to look at. Absolutely fascinating. The people's faces, people's clothes, everything. Like the signs on the protests. Everything, and the information that he provides. Like, obviously I'm not very far into it, but I am immensely enjoying it. So many interesting details, so many interesting facts. I am you see, I'm doing this like annotations, and I'm also underlying a lot of interesting information. Fascinating book, really, very, very interesting. So also, if you're interested in the topic, if you're interested in this time period in Russia, I would highly recommend this book as well. And then two more books I want to share with you, which they were not my favorite by any means. I wouldn't say that, like, I enjoyed reading them. Like, that is absolutely unquestionable. I absolutely enjoyed reading them, but I cannot say that, like, I loved them. Like, I definitely did not love them to the same degree as I loved the first book that I showed, Likhachev's book, or to the same degree as Tolstoy or Dovlatov or any of the previous books. But I still enjoyed them, and I found them interesting. So I wanted to share them with you. The first one, it's a it's a new book, new release, A Woman of Pleasure by Kyoko Murata. So obviously, Japanese author, Japanese book. I was interested in this because of the subject matter. And this book is based on a real event in Japanese history when, in the city in Kyushu, the southern island, prostitutes from like a rich quarter just walked out. They just left. They just walked out and they left, and they didn't, they kind of stood up for their rights, and yeah, they left the quarters. This has never happened before, and the system was that usually girls from poor families were sold by their families to a brothel, or like a house for these girls, and then it would be the girl's job to repay to the house the money that were paid for her to her family. And so basically they were stuck in those houses until they paid back the money out of their wages. And it's just a very interesting subject matter for me, of like how these girls lived, how these places functioned, how their lives differed, and obviously like their lives differed drastically depending on what kind of house they were bought by. If it's like a very expensive house with like high class expensive prostitutes, or a cheap house where girls died very, very fast, just like after a year or two they could just contract a disease and just die. So it all differed, and it is all which showed in this book. I feel like the historical research was quite well done for this book. There is a lot of interesting detail and information about the girls, about their life condition, about how everything was working, how the system worked, what the girls had to go through. However, why I didn't love it as much, I think I would enjoy this book much more if there would be more of like the inner of the character herself, of like her inner thoughts, her feelings. I would expect, from a girls living in such situation, I would expect some kind of, mental struggle. I would expect more of a character to be present in this book, because the girl herself, like, everything is just kind of all right for her. Just everything is like, fine, whatever happens, fine. And some pretty atrocious things happen sometimes, and like, really, uh, what would you expect in a place like that? And she just like kind of brush it off and it doesn't seem like it affects her in any way. And then everything kind of leads to the prostitutes walking out of this place. And again, I would expect, because no one has ever done it before, it's like their the first incident of such walking out that it became famous, and so it was the first time. And again, I would expect some kind of like, inner workings leading up to this event, leading up to girls like plucking their courage and leaving. But it just kind of happened out almost like out of nowhere. Like, obviously the main character, she's not happy about her position, and she wants the freedom. She always dreams about the freedom. She is from like even a smaller island, like remote island, fishermen, and they also swim, and they're divers as well. So she always dreams about like being free as a sea turtle. And it is like all present, it's all, it is here. But I feel like something was missing, like the kind of inner workings of the character, they were not enough for me. Even though like the historical research of the novel, like the like how everything works, and like historical descriptions were fascinating for me. It was really interesting for me to see how that part of the world existed and lived and how it functioned. So a lot of positive things about this book, but also it was kind of a little bit of like lacking of like character development, maybe you can call it, or kind of character's inner world, which I would like to see more of. But definitely a very interesting book, and I would recommend if you're interested in this type of stories. And then the last book which I wanted to share is The Buried Giant by Kazuo Ishiguro. I also really loved this book. I think I even enjoyed it a little bit more than A Woman of Pleasure, because I like such stories where love is very obviously present. And this is a story of a married couple, of an elderly married couple. This is a very like fable-like story. I'm sure many of you have already read this book, so you might even be able to describe it better than I can. But it is a very fable-like story, and the narration is almost like he's narrating you a fairy tale, which was interesting for me. I liked that type of narration. There is dragons present, there is knights present, there is like monasteries and monks, there is walled cities where they wander into. And this elderly couple, for me, they were the best part of the book, because they have so much love for each other. The thing is that in this world, people don't remember anything. For some reason, they just forget. They call it a mist. They think that they forget things because of this dragon that kind of breathes, and the mist from the breath of the dragon forces people to forget their past. And that's why now everybody is like living in peace, there is no war, but at the same time they don't remember anything about their past, about themselves, about their lives. They don't know. And this couple, they, for some reason, it's not that they remember, they kind of think that they have a son, and that their son lives in a different village, but they don't know which village and where that village is. They don't know either. But for some reason they miss their son, and they want to find, and they decide to go even though they don't really know where they're going. And they don't know where their son is. They just kind of hope that they will wander into the village and they will find their son. And it's kind of their quest of looking for their son. And there is so much love between them, there is so much support between them, they're so tender to each other, they're so caring about each other, and I love to see that. I love such stories. I love to see this type of relationships, especially if it's like, it's always when you see an elderly couple, I'm sure you have the same feeling. Like if you see an elderly couple, a man and a wife, walking somewhere together, holding hands, it always creates like a very, warm feeling in your chest. I'm sure it does. For me, it does. I love seeing elderly couples together. And this book was like, a story about a lovely, absolutely lovely elderly couple. However, both of them have this feeling that something terrible happened when they were young. And they just forgot it. And even though they want to kill the dragon, at the same time they are afraid that when the dragon is gone and they remember what happened in their past, the love might vanish. So there is like this question of memory and what role memory plays in our relationships between each other, in relationships between nations, the atrocities that had been done before. How can we overcome them? Is it possible to forgive? Is it even in a question of forgive? Is it real to forgive? So yeah, there is like a lot of philosophical questions, and there is the questions that there is no answer to. There is no answer to these questions. Nobody knows. It is an interesting book which asks painful questions, I would say, relevant questions also in our time, but at the same time these are questions without answers. So for me, the best part of this book was the story about these two elderly people, of them going on a quest together, searching for their son, supporting each other, loving each other, being tender with each other. I love seeing that, and that was the best part of this book for me. And also the narration, the style of narration was really pleasant for me to read. I really enjoyed the writing style. I enjoyed this fable-like narration, fairy tale-like narration. Yeah, I can say that I enjoyed this book quite a bit. I wouldn't say that it was the favorite of the year. It wasn't like the absolute favorite, but I had a great time with this book. It also helped that I started this book after I read another one which I really didn't like. I will not mention that book, but yeah, I didn't even finish. I DNF'd that other book, and I had like a horrible like feeling, like I wanted to take a shower after. I don't know, I felt really, didn't like that book. And then I pick up this one, start reading it, and it's like it was like my soul was like, yes. It's literally the feeling that I had. It was like, yes, when the first lines of this book, and my soul was, yes, this is what I want to read. So yeah, another book which I would also recommend. So these are the best books that I read this year. They're not a lot, but they're great, and I would highly recommend all of them. In particular, if you can find Sergei Dovlatov, or if you can find Dmitry Likhachov, highly recommend it. And for now, let me know in the comments what are some of the best books which you read this year and why you like them. And if you if you like them, you probably recommend them, right? So yeah, share in the comments some of the books which you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great day. Have a great celebration of the New Year Eve. Happy 2025. And yeah. Have a good day. I will see you soon in my next videos. Thank you. Bye.